the question occurs all the time, which is, how do I eliminate anxiety, or how do I eliminate negative emotion? And before we get there, I think it's more important to look at what is this negative emotion communicating to me instead of how do I eliminate it? Because you're just eliminating the messenger without looking at the message. And in order to understand what emotions are communicating, we can't understand any specific emotion outside of the context in which it exists. It's the same with the human language. If I tell a client to run, what does that mean? Well, it could mean they're in danger. It could mean we're playing a game called tag and I'm it. And so we're playing, we're having fun. It could mean they're about to do a race. So it depends on the context. You can't understand a word outside the context in which it's being used. The same is for emotion. So what does it mean when you're anxious? It could mean that you're in danger. It could mean that you're not where you should be, or not where you could be, or you're off track of the path that you find most valuable or meaningful. It could mean that you're entering or exiting your domain of competence, which means you're about to do a task or enter a space in which you need to be paying attention so that you don't get hurt or that you don't fail. This is why most people are anxious on their first day of school. There's a lot of uncertainty there. And to be able to manage yourself, your brain is saying, hey, pay attention, because if you're too unconscious and not paying attention, bad things can happen. So in order to perform, we're giving you a small dose of anxiety, nervousness, so that you're paying attention. Now, granted, that could be oversensitized. If you're too anxious, it shuts you down, it makes you less sensitive to certain things and more sensitive to your internal experience. And so, but just to eliminate the anxiety altogether without understanding what it's communicating could be extremely disruptive and destructive later on in life. And so before we eliminate stress, before we eliminate anxiety, we first want to try to understand, what might this be communicating to me? And that's a whole learning process. There's a whole learning curve with understanding what emotions might be communicating. So even if you ask the question, I'm stressed out, I'm overwhelmed, I'm anxious, what is this communicating to me? Don't say the answer with that much certainty or confidence, because when you have too much certainty, you close your eyes to the possibility of different answers. So that's why I say the question, what might this be communicating to me? So if I'm anxious, it's like, this might be communicating to me that I'm not sleeping enough. It might communicate to me that I'm focused on what I don't value, which is what I don't want to happen. It could mean I'm starting a journey that's going to demand me to grow in order to succeed. So there's the possibility of failure exists. Great, maybe that's exactly where I want to be. So what does the anxiety mean in that context? I'm right on track, and the growth process is about to begin. Now imagine I try to eliminate that anxiety. It doesn't make any sense, right? Now, if it's perpetual, it could be a result of focus. It could be a result that we're still off track, which means we've misinterpreted the communication and we're using a belief structure to try to stay off track. But it's so important to first understand what it's communicating to you so that you can get back on track. At a basic foundational level, we talk much more about this in our classes, or the classes coming up, which is called Align, and how to align our emotions and mindset to succeed on the path that we deem most valuable in our life. But part of the way your hippocampus works with your perception is that you have to have a valued goal that you're aiming at. And once you have that valued goal that you're looking at, your brain can detect whether it perceives you're making progress towards that or not. And if it can see that you're making progress towards that, you feel positive emotion. As you get closer to that mountaintop, you will feel positive emotion, which is motivation to continue moving forward. And if it can see that you're moving off track or in a conflicting direction, it will elicit negative emotion as a way of communicating to you that you're off track and that you're in violation to what's meaningful or valuable to you. And it's also a motivational system to get back on track. And that degree of motivation, whether it's positive or negative, correlates to how much on track are you versus how far off track are you. If I'm acting in a way that conflicts with every value possible to me, I'm going to feel a very high degree of negative emotion. And if I feel that high degree of negative emotion, the first question should not be, how do I eliminate negative emotion? It should be, what might this be communicating to me so that I can learn to get back on track where I want to be, right? And this is why the pursuit of happiness is kind of flawed, because you're trying to isolate your communication system to just find this person who communicates happiness to you, when it's technically more influential to say, the basic question on reflect on your life and find out what makes you happy. It's reflect on your life when happiness was communicated to you as a byproduct, and what were you in pursuit of or in the process of back then. So then you can reflect and find out what's meaningful to you. So the pursuit in life should be to pursue the thing that we find most meaningful or valuable, and happiness is a byproduct of that. Fulfillment is a byproduct of that, opposed to trying to artificially create a communication system based on top-down mental processes, absent living and pursuing a meaningful life. It just doesn't make any sense, right? So the 3 don'ts is, don't overgeneralize emotion. Just because anxiety is uncomfortable doesn't mean it's bad, and doesn't mean there's not something beneficial that it's trying to communicate to you. Now, one thing I won't get into is there are areas where it doesn't make sense to be as present as it is, which is the context of historical experience, which is just saying, maybe you're going to a new job and you feel anxious, and it's a lot of anxiety to the point where it's deterring you from showing up for the job. It's like, what is this communicating to you? The possibility of failure and being embarrassed and shamed and re-experiencing a past event is extremely high, and we recommend you not go to avoid that re-experiencing. And so there's work to be done to do that, to lower the anxiety so that you can move forward in the face of it. Now, granted, if you go into a place that's dangerous and you feel anxious and it's saying, hey, the possibility of danger exists, you should leave, there's times when you should absolutely leave. So it's much more complicated than to just overgeneralize. So 1, don't overgeneralize. 2, don't ignore it, right? Sometimes people struggle with negative emotion for years and years and years and years and years, and they keep trying to just live their life and find techniques that kind of put earmuffs over what the emotion's communicating to you. And it just compounds over time. Now, again, I'm not going to get into the areas of life where hormonally we're dysregulated, where somebody might need medication, because sometimes if we're that dysregulated, we need medication in order to regulate us to a degree where we can understand and process cognitively different communication systems, how to think about it differently, and how to move forward in the world. So that's a whole different, rabbit hole to go down. But we don't want to ignore emotion altogether. And then we don't want to eliminate it without understanding what it's communicating, okay? Which is what I've talked about so far. So those are the 3 things not to do. Now, the 3 things not to do, or the 3 things to do, is ask the question, what might this be communicating to me? Am I off track? Am I right where I intended to be, but exiting my domain of competence? Am I not being who I could be? So ask the question so that you can learn from it. Number 2, be grateful for it. Whether it's positive emotion or negative emotion, even though they're uncomfortable, be grateful the fact that you have a communication system and that it's working on your behalf. Now, in order for it to work on your behalf or to make it super efficient, you have to be aiming at something specific. You have to be aiming at what you value most to make sure the emotional communication is working properly. Because if you change your aim, you're changing the communication system, right? The on-off track system. And then 3, leverage it. Remember that emotions are a communication system, emotions are a motivational system. So when you experience positive emotion, that means keep going, remember this, repeat this is good. When you experience negative emotion, you're off track, and you can use that negative emotion to what? To get back on track. So those are the do's, those are the don'ts. We want to understand emotions before we try to eliminate them or change them.